in 1874, there was a group of Benedictine women in Maria Rickenbach, Switzerland. They had their little monastery right next to a special shrine of Our Lady called Maria Rickenbach. And in 1873, their confessors at Engelberg sent a group of monks to Conception Abbey, which is just 2 miles from here. And after they'd been here a year, they wrote back and asked if sisters from Maria Rickenbach would come here and join them in their ministry to the local population here in Northwest Missouri. And so we sent 5 sisters over to help the monks because there were no teachers or schools in the area. So we started out helping to teach the young children. But we were meant to be contemplative sisters. That is, a community dedicated to prayer and to living a schedule that gives our whole lives to God. But the need was for teachers right away, so we did that. We also started making communion wafers early on, and we embroidered and sewed the vestments that the priests use at Mass. You know how kindergarten teachers will sometimes ask students, what do you want to be when you grow up, and somebody wants to be a ballet dancer and somebody wants to be an astronaut. I said, I want to be a housewife in God's house. And that is probably the best description of what I grew up to be.
We sisters live in a monastery. There's about 35 of us that live here now. We do have our own dining room, though, and a big kitchen. We have our own chapel. We have a sister who makes soap. We have different sisters who are interested in gardening. So we have little garden patches, vegetable gardens, and flower gardens for different sisters. And we have sisters who work on the grounds, sisters who work in maintenance, sisters who work in our finance department, sisters who work in our correspondence department. So there's just a lot of jobs that when we enter community that we might be asked to do. So the little town of Clyde, a half mile away, has 82 people. Pretty small. And we have about 500 acres total of farmland. We turned a lot of the land into CRP land, which is kind of a conservation restoration project. A couple of us do some beekeeping, trying to help the environment, and also produce honey.
This is God's house, but it still needs to be cleaned. Food still needs to be cooked. We need to put things away. Somebody has to do laundry. We have to sweep the chapel. We have to polish the wood the same way you do in anybody else's house. Just because it's the house of God doesn't mean it doesn't get dusty. So we take care of God's house. And the people who come and visit us, just like if somebody comes to visit in your house, you need to take care of them and be there to welcome them and see to their needs. And we do that to the people who come here.
Our congregation has a very long history of receiving prayer requests from people through the mail. Because prayer is such an integral part of our work and our life, we are praying for the people of all times, of all places. We ask people, tell us what you need us to pray for, and they do. Really, every letter that comes in, every email that comes in gets a response. We have exposition during the day, and so the intercessions that come in, people's needs and prayers, that list of intentions is placed on that prie-dieu in front of the Blessed Sacrament, so all of our sisters can pray with it throughout the course of the day, so that people really know that we take this seriously, that this is what we're here for, and if you ask us to pray for you, we are praying for you.
Perpetual adoration is praying in front of the Blessed Sacrament all the time. So we have periods of adoration here in our monastery during the day, and so different sisters are assigned to a half an hour at a time, and then we take turns and go into chapel and pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And really, it's a very quiet time for us just to be with Jesus. We're not necessarily even praying prayers. We could just be sitting there quietly, maybe trying to listen to the voice of God as Jesus speaks to us. But there's always a list of prayers there on the prie-dieu when we go in there, and those are real prayers that people have written to us and asked for. And so every single sister who goes in there to her adoration period during the day will read through that list. So that's what really keeps us in contact with what's going on in the rest of the world.
So the Eucharist came from what Jesus presented at the Last Supper, which goes back to the Passover meal of the Jewish people. In the story of the Exodus, when they were leaving, they had to leave very quickly, and they had to prepare a meal quickly. And so they were told to make unleavened bread with no yeast in it, so it wouldn't be fluffy like regular bread. It would be a very thin, flat piece of bread that they could make very quickly to eat as they went. So it was that bread, that type of bread, that Jesus used at the Last Supper. It was not meant to be fancy or flavorful. It was meant to symbolize the rapidity, the quickness which they had to leave. They didn't have time to cook anything. And it was that Passover meal which symbolized when the angel of death passed over the Israelites in Egypt and spared them from death. Again, symbolized as Christ passing over from death, which spares us from the death of hell and opens everlasting life to us. So because Christ used this simple plain bread, that's what he handed on to us. That's what we continue to do. It's the tradition of the church.
The church says we can use flour and water, wheat and water, let's put it that way. And so for a very long time, probably from time beginning, we've been using flour and water.
We make about 6 million breads a month and about 85,000 low gluten breads a month. And we ship all across the world. We ship to every state within the United States, and we also ship international to Canada, Mexico, Australia, Europe, literally all over the world.
The regular host uses a huge baker because that we produce a very high volume of just the regular altar breads. In our low gluten production, we just have 2 individual bakers because we don't sell as many of those as the regular breads. But the recipe, of course, is very different for our regular breads. You can't add any leaven, you cannot use any yeast, but we can use regular flour. And we make wheat hosts and white hosts. And so it all starts with the flour. One recipe might have up to 110 pounds of flour, plus about 16 gallons of water. So that's all mixed up in the big mixing bowl, which you kids could take a bath in. It's that big. And so we don't make a dough, but we make a batter. It's more like waffle batter or cake batter. So it can pour. Once the batter is ready, we take it over to our big baker, and then that batter is poured out onto these very flat sheets. And then these sheets, there's 30 sets of sheets in our baker. It takes about 1.5 minutes for one set of baker plates to get baked completely. So a baked sheet is coming off about every 5 seconds. And we can make 7,000 to 8,000 sheets a day on this baker. And then once those are baked, then they need to be moistened. If you take a freshly baked wafer sheet off of our baker, it'll start to crack. So we have to moisturize them. What we use for our large production is put a lot of breads into what we call an atomizer room, and then overnight there is a fine mist that gets emitted into the room, and that's circulated by a couple of fans. And then by the time morning rolls around, those breads are wet enough that they can start to be cut. We cut several different sizes of hosts. The biggest one that we use with our punch cutter is a 2.5 inch, and that's a presider bread, so some priests will use that. We also cut 1 1/8 inch breads, 1 3/8 inch breads, and 1 1/2 inch breads. And it's just up to the parish to decide what size they want. The smaller breads, the 1 1/8 inch breads, are usually more popular for nursing homes or hospitals because they are a smaller bread. Once they are looked over after coming off the cutters, doing a little quality control, then they go into a hopper, and that's where we then bag them. We use just a simple Ziploc bag for our breads, and we package 500 breads per bag. And once those are sealed up, then they're put back into our shipping department and sit on a shelf until we get a sales order. And then our shippers will go pull the bags off the shelves and then box them up and then send them out by UPS or US mail. We've been making altar breads for over 110 years almost now. We started back in 1910. And because we are Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, this was a perfect kind of work for us to do, to bake the bread that becomes the body of Christ.
I mean, the breads that my hands made, that our hands made, we'll become the body of Christ. I mean, there's a sacredness in the work just for that. It's very definitely, as the Eucharistic prayer says, the work of our hands. It very much is the work of our hands.